Everyone says expansion is good for football. More teams, more nations, more dreams. So why does this feel dangerous? The 48-team World Cup sounds like progress until you realize it might quietly remove the one thing that made the World Cup sacred: tension. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. The World Cup was powerful not just because of who played, but because of who didn't survive. Scarcity created meaning. Elimination created drama. Pressure created legacy. And now, for the first time in modern history, that formula is being rewritten. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about psychology. In the next few minutes, we're going to break down what the 48-team format really changes structurally, emotionally, competitively, and why this could either save the future of football or dilute the greatest tournament on earth. And by the end, you might see the World Cup very differently. There was something almost mathematical about the 32-team World Cup era. 8 groups, 4 teams each, 2 eliminated immediately. No comfort zone, no margin for emotional error. It wasn't just a format, it was a pressure chamber. You didn't ease into the tournament, you survived it. Think about it like a university entrance exam. You failed twice, you're out. Simple, brutal, fair. That structure created urgency from match day 1. A draw wasn't neutral, it was dangerous. Every goal shifted the table. Goal difference wasn't a statistic, it was a heartbeat monitor. And fans felt that pressure weeks before kickoff, because even qualifying for the World Cup felt elite. There was scarcity, and scarcity creates value. Only 32 teams made it. Strong nations missed out entirely. That absence made presence meaningful. When a dark horse qualified, it wasn't just a nice story, it was an achievement carved out of difficulty. That tension began in the qualifiers and carried into every group stage game. Some of the most unforgettable World Cup moments didn't happen in finals. They happened on second match days, when teams calculated scenarios, when a late equalizer changed an entire group. Fans weren't just watching games, they were doing math, refreshing standings, living inside permutations. It felt interactive, almost intellectual. And here's the subtle thing: the format forced courage. If you knew only 2 advanced, you couldn't coast, you couldn't rotate casually, you couldn't play not to lose. So now the real question begins to form. What happens to that urgency when survival becomes statistically easier? In 2026, the World Cup doesn't just expand, it restructures reality. 12 groups of 4, 32 teams advancing to the knockout stage. That means only 16 teams are eliminated in the group phase. Read that again. 2/3 survive. The group stage stops being a filter and starts feeling like a gateway. When most teams go through anyway, psychology changes. Coaches calculate differently. Players manage energy differently. If qualification is statistically likely, why risk everything on match day 2? Why press desperately when a controlled draw keeps you safe? The emotional temperature drops, not dramatically, but subtly, and subtle shifts change entire tournaments. It begins to resemble an expanded Champions League structure, where early games sometimes feel procedural, not meaningless, but less decisive. And when a World Cup group stage becomes predictable, even slightly, tension transforms into anticipation instead of urgency. There's a difference. Urgency forces action. Anticipation waits. Now imagine a dark horse team entering this format. On one hand, expansion gives them oxygen. More teams mean more opportunity, more representation, more global inclusion. Smaller footballing nations finally get a real seat at the World Cup table. That part feels progressive, almost poetic. But structurally, when survival becomes common, desperation becomes rare. And desperation is where drama lives. So the deeper question quietly surfaces. If the format changes strategy, does it also change emotion? Some of the strongest World Cup memories aren't finals. They're eliminations. A giant collapsing in the group stage, a dark horse surviving against the odds. That raw, uncomfortable feeling when a powerhouse nation realizes it's going home early. That wasn't cruelty. That was consequence. And consequence creates meaning. There was something brutal about the traditional World Cup structure. One bad half could define 4 years. One defensive mistake could erase an entire generation's dream. That emotional weight made even small games feel enormous. A 1-1 draw wasn't neutral. It was dangerous territory. Every touch carried tension. With 48 teams, the fear of early elimination softens. Not disappears, but softens. More mismatches become likely, more 4-0 scorelines, more predictable openings. And when unpredictability becomes diluted even slightly, the emotional spikes flatten. It's like stretching a rubber band too far. The snap isn't as sharp. There's also a psychological principle at play. When everyone gets closer to progression, progression feels less rare. If most teams advance, qualifying for the knockouts doesn't feel like surviving a storm. It feels like completing a phase, and the World Cup was never meant to feel procedural. But here's where the debate becomes interesting. Expansion brings inclusion. More flags, more cultures, more nations dreaming. That's powerful. That's global. So the real tension isn't whether growth is good, it's whether growth quietly changes what we emotionally value in the first place. Critics say expanding the World Cup to 48 teams will lower the overall level. More mismatches, more predictable scorelines, less technical balance. And at first glance, that argument feels logical. If you widen the gate, average quality drops. That's basic probability. But football isn't played on spreadsheets. It's played in chaos. Look at the last World Cup. A dark horse reached the semifinals. A heavy favorite lost to a team nobody expected to compete. These weren't accidents. They were signals. Smaller nations have invested. Tactical discipline has improved globally. Data, sports science, infrastructure, they're no longer exclusive to traditional giants. The gap is narrower than it was 20 years ago. And here's the paradox. More teams could mean more mismatches, but also more volatility, more opportunities for a Cinderella story, more chances for tactical surprises. When you expand the field, you don't just add weaker sides, you add unpredictability. And unpredictability is oxygen for the World Cup narrative. But unpredictability has two faces. One creates magic, the other creates forgettable afternoons. A shocking upset becomes iconic. A routine 5-0 becomes background noise. The question isn't whether quality drops slightly. The question is whether the added chaos compensates for it. So now we arrive at the uncomfortable trade-off. Are we increasing the probability of historic moments, or increasing the volume of games that blur together? And once that question surfaces, it inevitably leads somewhere deeper. Let's step out of romance for a second and be honest. Tournaments don't expand purely because of poetry. When the World Cup moves from 32 to 48 teams, it doesn't just create more stories, it creates more inventory, more matches, more broadcast windows, more sponsorship slots, more global markets plugged into the machine. Every additional game is a commercial opportunity. More teams mean more national audiences watching, more flags, more jerseys, more advertisers buying emotional space during halftime. From a business perspective, expansion makes perfect sense. Football isn't just sport anymore, it's infrastructure. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The World Cup used to feel rare, compressed, intense, like your favorite underground band playing in a small venue. When it goes mainstream, more people discover it, and that's beautiful. But intimacy shifts. The vibe changes. It becomes bigger and slightly less personal. That doesn't make expansion evil, it makes it strategic. Governing bodies think in decades, not in nostalgia. More teams also mean political influence, development funds, regional support. Inclusion strengthens global alliances. The decision isn't random, it's calculated. But when economics shapes structure, structure shapes emotion. And once the rhythm of the tournament changes, something deeper shifts. Not just in strategy, but in how fans feel from the opening whistle. You felt it from the anthem of the first match. There was no time to adjust, no space to experiment. Coaches couldn't afford slow starts, players couldn't ease into form. The tournament demanded intensity immediately. With 48 teams, the rhythm stretches. The calendar expands, 32 teams advancing changes the internal math. Managers may rotate earlier, star players might conserve energy. A cautious draw could feel strategically acceptable. And when caution becomes rational, urgency becomes optional. That subtle psychological shift matters more than people think. The old format forced teams to attack scenarios. Now, some might manage them. Match day 1 may feel like assessment. Match day 2 like positioning. Survival is less fragile. And when survival is less fragile, emotion becomes less explosive. Fans respond to rhythm, even if they don't consciously analyze it. Tension builds when elimination is near. But if elimination feels distant, early games risk feeling like prologue instead of climax. The World Cup was once a sprint disguised as a marathon. Now, it might become a marathon pretending to sprint. And when rhythm changes, identity follows. Because tournaments aren't just structures, they're emotional experiences. Which leads to the final question that lingers over everything we've explored. Maybe the 48-team World Cup won't destroy tradition. Maybe it will evolve it. Football has changed before and survived. The back pass rule changed the game. VAR changed the game. Tactical revolutions changed the game, and yet the World Cup remained the emotional center of it all. But evolution always costs something. The real question isn't whether expansion is good or bad, it's what we're willing to trade. More teams, more inclusion, more global representation, in exchange for what? A little less urgency? A little less scarcity? A slightly softer edge to the most brutal tournament in football? 5 years from now, we'll know. We'll either look back and say this expansion unlocked a new golden era, more dark horse stories, more chaos, more unforgettable nights. Or we'll quietly admit that something sacred shifted the moment the structure changed. So what do you think? Does the 48-team World Cup protect the future of football or dilute what made it special? Comment your take below. And if you care about how football is changing, not just who's winning, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay here. Because the game isn't just evolving on the pitch, it's evolving in structure, in psychology, and in meaning.